All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for a 1-hour webinar providing a progress update on Seattle's unreinforced masonry, also known as URM Retrofit program. We have a few housekeeping items before we begin. Today's presentation will be recorded. I think you just all heard that. Both audio and video will be recorded, and this will be posted to the city's URM website for future reference. And I am, sorry, just a moment, getting some updates about registration not being approved. All right, I'm gonna mute this so that I am not hearing this. Okay. So if you have questions during the webinar, please feel free to open the chat window and to submit your question through that. We'll hold off answering questions until the end of today's presentation. If you need closed captioning or translations, they are available for today's presentation. To enable those, you go to the lower left-hand corner of your screen and click on the speech bubble. You can click on the little caret next to it, and it will allow you to select different languages for translation. Now for some quick introductions to your SDCI URM experts. I'm Amanda Hertzfeld. I've met many of you before. I'm the URM program manager, so I'm tasked with leading development of our retrofit policy, as well as identifying financial incentives. And Derek, I'll let you introduce yourself.
I'm Derek Olgren. I am the new URM program lead engineer for the city of Seattle. Formerly worked in the private sector as a design engineer on URM retrofits and other existing buildings. And I'm also a structural plan reviewer for the city of Seattle.
Great. Thanks, Derek. Today's webinar is meant to provide an update to a general audience on the development of Seattle's URM retrofit program. We plan to cover Seattle's earthquake vulnerability, upcoming changes to city codes to recognize URMs as retrofitted. We will review some funding incentives that are currently in development, and will provide opportunities for questions and answers. As a reminder, this webinar is recorded and again will be posted so you can access the slides at a later date. And we do have another webinar tomorrow that we'll talk about briefly here. The webinar tomorrow is at 2:30 p.m. and it's a technical briefing, so it's geared towards a more technical audience with experience in design and structural engineering. And the focus of this webinar will be on the URM retrofit codes. You can register at the link in our website on the upcoming event side. If you Google URM SDCI, you'll come to our homepage and it'll be under upcoming events on the right-hand side of the screen. A quick reminder as to why Seattle is pursuing the retrofit of URM buildings. We live in a high seismic risk zone with active earthquake faults all across the state. Seattle has an 86% chance of experiencing a damaging earthquake in the next 50 years. So it's not a question of if an earthquake will happen, but rather when. Our last damaging earthquake was the February 2001 Nisqually earthquake. It was a magnitude 6.8 and it injured approximately 400 people and caused upwards of $2 billion in property damage, including over $8 million in repair costs to just URMs in Seattle. Most of the buildings that were deemed unsafe to occupy or were red tagged after this earthquake were URMs. And those pictures there are from the Cadillac Hotel and Klondike Gold Rush Museum. URMs perform predictably poorly in an earthquake, and we've known this for decades. We know that they are vulnerable to collapse in an earthquake. The parapets, which is the part of the building that can extend or that does extend above the roof line, lack structural support and can fall outwards into the street. The image on the left, again, Nisqually earthquake, shows a real-life example of this happening. Pedestrians on the sidewalk and vehicle occupants could have been killed. Post-earthquake, the adjacent buildings, the roads, and the sidewalk are closed until that damaged building is structurally stabilized, which can take months or even years, depending on the local extent of earthquake damages. These closures, in addition to damages and injuries from the earthquake, can have significant economic impact. In a higher intensity or longer duration earthquake than the Squally, URM performance will continue to degrade with floors separating from the walls that can cause the building to collapse. The image on the right is from the 2011 earthquakes in Christchurch, New Zealand, and it shows a city bus that was crushed from a URM collapsing. Only one person on that bus survived. So the point that we're making here is that retrofitting URMs is a life safety and public safety issue. We know these buildings are vulnerable and we know how to improve their safety. So by seismically retrofitting our URMs, we can increase the city's seismic resilience. We can reduce potential deaths, damages, and disruption to our economy and daily life post-earthquake. Seattle inventoried its URMs, and there are roughly 1,100 throughout the city, represented by the red dots on the map on the right. A 2017 SDCI-led policy committee classified the vulnerability of these buildings based upon their occupancy type, their number of stories, and proximity to areas of liquefaction or landslide hazards. In the future, these vulnerability classifications will be used to inform compliance timelines for mandatory retrofits. Higher vulnerability buildings will have shorter timelines for compliance. Again, these are proposed compliance timelines, and they will not go into effect until mandatory retrofits are required. Just running through what these classifications are. Critical vulnerability buildings apply to emergency service facilities and schools, and it's been proposed that they'll have 7 years to retrofit after adoption of a mandatory retrofit ordinance. High vulnerability buildings include those over 3 stories, located in poor soil areas, and buildings that contain greater occupancies of more than 100 people. And these high vulnerability structures will have 10 years from adoption. Again, this is proposed 10 years after the adoption of mandatory retrofit ordinance. And then we have medium vulnerability because there's no such thing as low vulnerability URMs. Those encompass all the remaining buildings, and it's been proposed that they have 13 years from the adoption of the mandatory retrofit ordinance. So I bring this up because this question always pops up as soon as we start talking about mandatory compliance. But we are not at a mandatory compliance timeline yet. So a quick history and description of where we're at now. The city attempted to require structural retrofits of URMs in the 70s, and this legislation was quickly repealed due to the high cost to building owners. The image on the bottom left, it shows Seattle's existing code-based method for a URM retrofit, and as you can see, it requires an extensive amount of work. After the 2001 Nisqually earthquake, SDCI led a team of experts to develop a reduced retrofit standard that prioritizes the strengthening of structural deficiencies while also minimizing costs. This, what we're calling alternate method for retrofit, is demonstrated on the graphic on the right. And this approach or this standard was shared in 2012, and then in 2017 was recommended for implementation as part of a future mandatory program. The city passed legislation in 2021 guiding the development of the mandatory retrofit program. And as a result, SDCI began the update of that 2012 standard to reflect advances in our understanding of the local seismic hazard. The update of that standard did include input from UW, from the Structural Engineers Association of Washington, as well as a robust public-private partnership with the city's URM technical standard team. Over the past 2 years, we've finalized this standard. You've likely heard about Director's Rule 6-2023, as well as Resolution 32111. And we're happy to share that it will be codified through the 2021 Seattle existing building codes, which will go into effect on November 15th. So we're going to talk about that in some more detail. But just a couple more quick things about our guiding legislation, that 2021 Resolution 32033. So that resolution, again, is guiding the development of our phased-in mandatory program, and it identifies 6 key programmatic elements. Today, we're focused primarily on item number 2, the identification of a retrofit standard to bring URMs into compliance. This was the basis of the update to that standard, which I just talked about. And we're going to discuss funding in a few moments, but I will just acknowledge that item 6 on this list is the need for a variety of potential funding opportunities and financial incentives for building owners to alleviate the financial burden of required seismic retrofits for URM. I'm just going to emphasize here the URM codes currently being adopted in 2021 Seattle existing building code are voluntary, and we'll get into that a little bit more. But the city is continuing to pursue supportive resources, both financial and technical, and we will get into those. The last thing, though, from this 2021 resolution is that the primary goal of the retrofit program is to protect life safety by reducing the risk of injury from collapse of URMs in the event of an earthquake. I bring this up because the alternate method for URM retrofit is a minimum life safety improvement and does not bring the building up to current code. Building owners are encouraged to consult a structural engineer and to retrofit to higher performance standards and to consider additional resiliency factors such as energy efficiency and emission reduction upgrades. Buildings retrofitted using the alternate method should still anticipate damages in an earthquake. Again, it's a minimum improvement meant to reduce the risk of injury from collapse of a URM. So, compliance with the 2021 Seattle existing building code for URM retrofits is currently voluntary. The city's intent remains implementing mandatory retrofit requirements. However, we know that supportive resources are needed to adopt and implement a mandatory retrofit program. Our goal or our intent here is by adopting these voluntary measures now and codifying that alternate method for retrofit, as well as defining what a retrofitted URM is. It will allow the numerous owners with current capacity and interest to retrofit so they can do so now and be compliant with future mandatory requirements. We don't want to delay life safety improvements that folks are interested in undergoing currently, and we will continue the process of developing supportive resources. So we're going to talk now about what specifically is in those new codes. I'm going to let Derek talk here in just a minute about some more of the technical pieces, but I will just say that 2021 Seattle existing building codes, they were adopted by City Council on October 8th, and they will go into effect on November 15th. The next 3 slides, like I said, are going to get a bit more technical and go into what's in those code changes, but this first piece here is relatively easy. The codes already included a definition of what a URM is, and what a URM building is, and they now include a definition of what a retrofitted URM building is. And that is defined as a building, a URM building that meets a minimally acceptable level of life safety risk from earthquakes by demonstrating compliance with section 304.5.1 of the Seattle existing building code. There's also a note that says retrofitted buildings are eligible for a status change in the City of Seattle URM database. So I'm going to hand it over to Derek to talk more about what that section 304.5.1 is. So Derek, take it away.
Thank you, Amanda. You hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, like Amanda said, I'll go over some of the new retrofit requirements or seismic regulations for UM buildings. They will be found in section 304.5 of the 2021 SEBC, and they will describe pathways to be recognized as a retrofitted building. The first section on this slide, which shows 304.5, defines the criteria that, when met, would require a URM building to undergo a seismic retrofit. Currently, these criteria are if the building sees an increase in occupancy or if the owner wants to voluntarily upgrade the building's earthquake resistance. The second section, 304.5.1, defines the code recognized methods for retrofitting a URM building. Item 1 is commonly known as the code compliant retrofit and is applied to buildings undergoing a substantial alteration currently. This can also be pursued voluntarily. The section's not changing from the previous code. The requirements for design forces will be the same. Item number 2 is a new appendix called the alternate method, which I'll cover a little bit more detail in the next slide. And then item 3 provides a pathway for buildings that have been previously permitted and completed a seismic retrofit for them to be recognized as retrofitted by the building department. Parts A and B are for URM buildings that completed a seismic retrofit due to a substantial alteration, and Part C is for any other seismic retrofit that may have been done voluntarily but meets the scope of work required for a substantial alteration or the new alternate method. And then Appendix A6 codifies the use of the alternate method for the retrofit of URM buildings. This section was previously published last year as the Director's Rule 6/2003 and was 2023, and formally outlined in the draft technical standards for URM retrofit, and is based off the California Bolts Plus method. Many engineers that you speak to about retrofits for URM buildings will be familiar with both of those methods. And it provides a method of compliance with the new seismic regulations, but at a lower life safety standard than a full code retrofit, and hopefully with reduced construction costs for the owner. And I'll be giving a presentation tomorrow that will go into much more detail on this section and the rest of the code requirements. Amanda, give it back to you.
Thanks, Derek. So summarizing, the 2021 Seattle Existing Building Code will be effective November 15th, and it will codify pathways to be recognized as a retrofitted URM, and it also defines some minimum standards. Got a number of other updates I do want to cover, and then we'll get into some funding things. One key update we haven't talked about yet is the reorganization of our website. So the SDCI URM webpage has been updated. I get there by Googling URM and SDCI, and it pops up. You'll see there's a new FAQ page that provides answers and links to resources. Our project documents page contains a link to a new construction pre-submittal conference seismic retrofit questionnaire, which is a very long title. But this document is meant for those that are interested in qualifying for use of the alternate method for retrofit. You can fill out this form that goes through the different qualification steps, and then you can bring that with you to your pre-submittal conference. The webpage also includes instructions for signing up for that meeting. And also on the project documents page, you'll find the procedure to appeal URM determination. So that's for building owners that are contesting their URM designation. And that document, it hasn't changed much. It's just, it's reflecting the new URM retrofit language, as well as there were some references to our department as DPD, and we've been SDCI for quite a while now. Some other things coming soon. We have a goal of November 15th, our code adoption date. We hope to be publishing the procedures to demonstrate retrofit status of URM buildings. This will be a PDF document that should clarify reporting requirements as well as the submittal process for that information. And then lastly, our team has been conducting permit research to update our URM database. There's been several demolitions and permits filed that have not been reflected in our database, and we intend to update the PDF of our URM list, or our URM database as we've been referring to it, to be more descriptive of what retrofit status means and to begin tracking code compliant retrofit. So the URM database, again, which many of you refer to as the URM list, it's currently published monthly as a PDF on our webpage. The buildings in this database were identified by SDCI as having URM bearing walls. Currently, it has a column for risk category, and that title will be changing to vulnerability classification. And that's meant to avoid confusing terminology for the technical folks in the audience. Risk category means something different to an engineer. So we're changing that to vulnerability classification. And again, that's what will be linked to future compliance timelines, which again has not yet been finalized. But that designation is determined by the building's height, occupancy type, and vulnerability to liquefaction, landslide hazards, as well as steep slopes. And we're adding columns to the spreadsheet so that you have transparency on your building status there. We're also going to be adding a column for retrofit level. So currently there's a column there for retrofits, and what we're changing is to reflect our new code definition. So we'll have a confirmed compliant retrofit column that will just be a yes or no that you have retrofitted to our codes or not. And then the column next to it will reflect the method that was used. So Derek just went into those different pathways there on whether it's a previous subalt, whether you're doing a subalt now, or whether you're using the alternate method. That will be reflected in that column. And I'll just say buildings that are demonstrating they are incorrectly labeled as URMs, so using that appeal form, they can be removed from this list. I will say, I understand that the information that we're providing today is a bit complicated. There's a whole lot happening, and we are here to help you. So SDCI is offering free 15-minute coaching sessions with an engineer. To schedule these, you can send an email to sci_URM@seattle.gov, and we can help you working through if you have questions about that alternate method qualifications using that super long title, the URM pre-submittal conference seismic retrofit questionnaire. So if you have questions filling that out, we can help you answer those. We can help you with strategizing the best way to get permits for your project. And then, of course, we also have our pre-submittal construction conferences, and we can go through those. We'll have some directions on our website as well for how to do that for a URM, so we can make sure we have the right people there to help you answer your questions. Lastly, SDCI has partnered with the Seattle Office of Economic Development to provide permit coaching and expedited services for small businesses. You can reach out to their representative to determine if you qualify for that status. I'm going to pass it to Derek here to talk about a couple of the supportive resources on the technical side that are in development.
Amanda. So in anticipation of the adoption of the 2021 SEBC on November 15th, we've been working on some additional technical resources to help out. First will be the code commentary, which is a companion document go with the new sections of the SEBC, and will provide some additional context to the code language. We're going to be providing some historical context as well as discussion on how some of the engineering decisions were made by the technical committee. So it'll be a little bit of background information about the how and why the retrofit ordinance is coming into place. We would like to also offer some additional trainings on how to comply with the new code sections. We currently anticipate providing additional resources on how to demonstrate compliance of a previously completed URM retrofit, in addition to some of the coaching sessions that Amanda previously mentioned. We'd also like to know what you would prefer to see more detailed training on, and how would be the best way to receive it, either more webinars or in-person sessions. Amanda?
Thanks. Getting into the financial resources now, we've been, our messaging has been focused on, in the past on both, we've been calling supportive resources. And so that's the technical resources as well as the financial resources. Just a reminder that the financial resources are guided by that 2021 resolution that tells us to pursue a variety of resources. And I'm going to walk through some of the things that are in development. So number one, we have heard from many of you that an expedited permit review for URM retrofits would be very helpful. We are currently exploring opportunities for both priority permit reviews and opportunities for reductions in fees. There's a lot that goes into that, and legislation, it's going to take a little bit of time, but we are exploring that process right now. We're also looking into tax incentives. Through the Washington State Seismic Safety Subcommittee, we're full of long-winded titles in this group. The Seismic Safety Subcommittee through the state is recommending a statewide study on tax incentives that would look at modifications to the special valuation tax, to current use tax, potential sales tax exemptions. It's a pretty broad study that we're requesting, and we've reached out to a number of folks to get support and input on the scope of that study. While the state level is requesting the study, Seattle is meeting with some legislators to request a governor's budget proviso to fund this. The study would take a year-ish in order to complete, and then whatever those recommendations are would then have to be implemented. But the list on the right-hand side of your screen is the list of supporters for this tax incentive study, and we're excited that it's a pretty lengthy list from all over the state. We're really trying to emphasize that this isn't just a Seattle issue, it's a statewide issue. And Seattle's excited to be leading efforts here, building support, and hope that we can get some statewide funding or statewide incentives. Last bullet on the slide is a transfer of development rights. Many of you were likely involved with that listening session we held in February. Our goal is by the end of this year to publish a report documenting the stakeholder input we received from that meeting, as well as all the previous TDR discussions that we've had. And then early next year, we're hoping to release a request for proposals to conduct a feasibility study. Developing a TDR program is going to take some time. It's going to take investment from the city. So we need to be really intentional and thoughtful with the capacity to do this. So that's the feasibility study. There are two additional categories of funding that we're looking into. One, the top of your slide here is the reimbursement program for underserved populations. So this is in development. We're currently awaiting award of the first phase of a FEMA grant. This grant will support the development of FEMA cost-effective studies on what we're calling prototype buildings in both the CID and Pioneer Square. So we have funding to develop 3 to 4 prototype buildings, going through and demonstrating to FEMA that it is cost-effective to retrofit these buildings. Like I said, we're awaiting award of this. So we were selected for award, we haven't received it. And then once we receive the funding, council has to actually formally accept the award. So it's a slow moving process here, but we're excited that we've got a little bit of funding to do this. Once we actually have the funding and council's accepted it, we will be putting out an RFP and engaging with neighborhood stakeholders on selecting the most representative or high need buildings and working to get really detailed cost information. The second phase of this grant is a number of years out. We have to finish the first phase first, but the second phase will be a much larger grant application to FEMA requesting funding to reimburse underserved population URM owners for the retrofit work. And the levels of reimbursement have not yet been established for this. We're trying to essentially duplicate a program that's been successful with the city of Berkeley. So slow moving, but we're making progress, which is exciting. The second category of funding on the slide is financing. So I think most of you know about CPACER, commercial property assessed. I don't remember the rest of the acronym, but it's a loan or lien program available through partnership with King County. These stay on the property, so if you sell the building, the future owner will continue paying that unless it's part of the closure deals. But the benefit of these is that the loans often require no upfront cash, and they may have lower interest rates. This program is available to both energy and seismic retrofits. So it's worth looking into. And then the last item on the slide is an effort to bring together lenders and insurers with both building owners and developers to create financing solutions for retrofit. We're working on a FEMA grant to support this work right now, but the underlying emphasis here is that it's pretty well known that URM retrofits benefit multiple stakeholders, right? The owners of the building, the occupants of the building, the people on the streets, as well as local economy, but the burden of cost of for the retrofit falls solely on the owner. So the application that we're working on is intended to identify missing markets and to convene lenders, insurers, investors, building owners, developers to design a collaborative system to incentivize retrofit. And I'll just say there's been successes using this type of program with flood and wind hazards. And so the group that has helped to facilitate these conversations is who we're working with on this grant application. So we're in the home stretch, folks, opening it up to questions here pretty soon. But a few reminders before we open it up to questions. One is a URM owner can undergo a retrofit at any time. So just because it's not mandatory at this time doesn't mean you have to wait. You can do that now if you'd like. A voluntary URM retrofit on its own does not trigger a substantial alteration. We've heard that that's a very big concern, and we want to emphasize that it does not trigger a subalt on its own. A reminder again that the alternate method is a minimum life safety improvement and does not bring the building up to current codes. Third bullet here is, though not currently mandated by the city, building owners should consider potential risks and liability associated with the public safety risk posed by their URM building in an earthquake. There have been lawsuits in California where building owners were held liable for URM failures, despite retrofit compliance timelines for the local jurisdiction. So I'll just do a little arrow back up to that first bullet there. You can undergo a URM retrofit at any time. And then my last bullet on a lighter note is in an earthquake, drop cover and hold on. The annual shakeout drill is tomorrow at 10:17 a.m. So I encourage you to think about what you're doing at 10:17 a.m. tomorrow and what you would do if an earthquake happened. And feel free to send us selfies of you and your family practicing drop cover and hold on. So with that, I do want to open it up to questions, and you can put a question in the chat, or you can, and it looks like we've had a few questions in the chat, as well as you can raise your hand and we can call on you. Going through, the first question I see is, will there be a recording of presentation? Yes, this is being recorded and will be posted onto our website. The second question I see, is there a GIS version of the SDCI URM list? Yes, you can. There's a link on our website. Right underneath the URM list, it takes you to, I think it's Tyler and Insights or data.seattle.gov, and you can download that data there. There's also a map viewer if you want to view it spatially. There's a question, are there incentives under consideration to promote URM retrofit of affordable housing? Let's see. We are looking into the affordable housing and how we can work together. And I'll just say that's kind of lumped in with both our tax incentive study, as well as we'll be involved in the meetings we're having for the financial incentives and the grant reimbursement program. For those who are not in the previous meeting, can you summarize what a transfer of development rights is? Yes. So transfer of development rights, and thank you for this question, or TDR, is and maybe you've heard of air rights, but it's essentially allowing unused development space. So say, a very simplified example here, say your where your building is located is zoned for 6 stories, but your URM building is 3. You could sell the 3 stories in height to essentially be to use. You could sell those. Sorry, I'm getting distracted by additional questions popping up. You could sell those 3 floors of unused development to someone else, like a developer, to add 3 floors higher in another area of the city, and use that money from the sale of those credits to fund your retrofit. There's a lot that'll go into this, thus the need for a feasibility study. Next question I see. The alternate method is not available to risk category 4. Is that the same as your category called critical? Derek, do you want to take that question?
I can take that one. Short answer is no, it's not the same, and that's why we are relabeling our data set, the URM database, to refer to vulnerability categories and not risk categories that we previously did. A risk category 4 building is the highest level of seismic risk that you can associate with the structure during the design phase, and it usually applies to things like fire stations and other critical emergency management facilities that need to be operational after a hazard of any kind, be it a earthquake or a high wind event.
Thanks, Derek.
Yeah, and I also just wanted to add real quick to the first one about the GIS databasing is that we are working to improve that as well. So towards the end of this year, after the ordinance goes into, or sorry, not the ordinance, after the new building codes go into effect, we will have some improved GIS databasing so that it'll be a little bit easier to navigate online.
Thanks for plugging that update, Derek. I know we're excited about that. I have 2 more questions here that I see. Do the tax incentives apply to a substantial alteration URM retrofit? So the tax incentives, that's a tricky question because the tax incentives don't necessarily exist yet. The tax incentive study that is underway will apply to a substantial alteration as well as to the alternate method retrofit. There are existing, so if you qualify for landmark status, or if you are a designated landmark building, there are existing tax incentives for historic rehabilitation that could be used to support seismic retrofits as well. Let's see, the next question I see, does the list of the 1,100 URMs include buildings that have already been retrofitted? And if so, do you know how many? So Erin, that's a great question. It's a little bit of a tricky answer because we are going to require some documentation to demonstrate that the building has been retrofitted in compliance with our codes. So we just now are finalizing what it means to be retrofitted. We will have an idea of the number of buildings that we think will qualify, but that's not, it's not published yet. Are there any other questions? You are welcome to raise your hand or come off mute and ask them. I see another question. Are the 15-minute training consultations available with translation services? That's a great question. We certainly can arrange to have a translator at those meetings. I think it gets challenging because generally the meeting would be quite technical in that you're covering engineering subjects, so that does get trickier to translate. But I would just say if you send an email to the SCI_URM with some of your questions and a request for a translator, we can work on getting something scheduled. Are there any other questions? I think I just unmuted. There we go. Any other questions? Right, I'm not seeing any. Well, I will just say here on the side of your screen is contact information for both Derek and myself. And I will also add, if you have suggestions for aspects of today's presentation that need some more trainings, we are interested in developing those trainings for you. So send a message. Along with, if you have a preferred method for receiving these trainings, also let us know. And if you're having any issues currently with permitting your URM retrofit, you can also reach out to us and let us know, and we can help troubleshoot those. So with that, I think I will stop recording, and I will end the show.